Welcome back to another episode of the Dear Higher Self podcast. Lauren and Gina back here with you again to continue helping you along your journey. And more specifically, in this episode, we are going to be talking about the journey back home to yourself, which I feel like is a term we hear quite a bit, quite often in the circle that Lauren and I run with. And I just feel like that's something that happens a lot when you're in your 30s is that journey of figuring out, okay, well, who am I really, and what does it mean to be me? And is all these ideas and thoughts that I have in my head my own, or is it somebody else's? Like, what is actually me? Who am I? I mean, this is what we do on the podcast here. We answer the biggest questions that you could possibly have about your life. And I know for me, the journey back home to myself really did start in the beginning of my 30s, probably right around like age 29 is when I started seeing, okay, hang on, who actually am I? What do I actually like? And what does it mean to be me? Lauren, do you feel like it started around the same time for you?
I think I would say like a lot of my 20s, I had these questions, but I don't think I really started to get answers until my 30s, right? Like, I think I was really curious about a lot of this stuff. And like we talked about last time, it's like, I love how we just jump off with these huge, like complete impossible to answer questions, or we're like, who am I? What am I here for? What's the purpose? Like, go right in at 100%. But yeah, I think I was asking myself a lot of these questions, like mid 20s. It's like you graduate college, you finish school, you get your first couple of like real, big girl jobs, and then you're kind of questioning everything. Like, what is the point of all of this? What am I doing? Is this really what I want? Like, yeah. Why did I even choose this path? And then I would say like, yeah, early 30s is when I started to actually find some answers that felt true to me. It was like, it took several years of sort of looking outside of myself for answers and trying some different things on and, going a few different routes. And then I was able to actually land in something that felt like, okay, this is authentic to me. I will say it's like, I don't think there's a specific timeline that's true for everybody, right? It's not like, okay, this decade you do this decade you do that. I think for a lot of people, like, you might not even start to explore some of these concepts until you're in your 40s or 50s or later in life, right? And I know plenty of people in my own life, some of my family members even that I'm thinking of, who kind of really started going this path in their 50s, and then, in their 60s, they started to feel some more like ground beneath them. And I also think there's times where maybe you feel really confident in who you are and you feel really anchored in that in your 30s. And then you'll have some sort of big, life awakening. Something happens in your 40s or your 50s, and then you're kind of back to like starting over in a way again too. So I think it's an ongoing evolution, and it's something that you're always the way I like to think about it is like a spiral staircase where you're moving, right? Like, you're going around and around and around, but like ideally you're continuing to move up the staircase a little bit, right? And so you're like bringing all of your life experience with you, but you're continuing to understand more and more about like your consciousness and what all of this is for, but still asking questions and still kind of continuing to expand and to grow. So yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot.
Totally. I love the spiral analogy because I feel like so much with science and what they're discovering, everything is a spiral, and you're constantly, as the spiral starts tight and it gets wider and wider as you are expanding further into yourself and what that means to be yourself. So yeah, I definitely think it's an ongoing journey of continuously peeling back those layers and like a microscope, just going deeper and deeper into yourself if you're willing to walk that journey, right? Because some people don't necessarily care to walk that journey, and they're just hey, I'm present here doing what it is that I want to do, and I don't want to go in, and I don't want to go deep, and that's cool too.
Yeah.
But I feel like when we get here, for the most part, it's like we're a blank operating system. I mean, you've got a little bit of like DNA at play, but for the most part, you are just like a blank hard drive. Mm-hmm. And you are getting the different programming from your surroundings in your childhood, from your caretakers and the different experiences you have in childhood. And that's adding like the software programming to your mind and kind of shaping who you're going to become. So there's like this nurture nature thing that is constantly like adding this programming to your software. And then as you get, I feel like, into your teenage years and you're fighting for your independence because you're like, no, wait, I got this. Like, I know how this all works. I could do it all. And then it's not until your 20s that you're like, okay, let's apply all this. Like, now I have the freedom here as an adult with no parents to kind of tell me what to do per se. And how do I apply all the ways that I think I am, who I am, and how I want to live life. And I think as we're applying that through our 20s, we start to realize, like, oh, like some of this does feel aligned and some of this doesn't necessarily feel aligned. And I think we kind of bump into a few different walls, kind of like a bowling ball down an alley with the gutters up, right? Like, oh, wait, no, hold on, that's not me. Oh, wait, that didn't feel good. Oh, this feels really good. And then it's like by the time you kind of get to your 30s is when you can kind of you have enough data to process of like, okay, what of this software programming is mine and what was put there, and then you have the opportunity to kind of go, okay, like, do I want to have a software update? I love doing the computer analogies. I feel like that conceptually like makes my mind like understand it better. And
I know.
I like the analogy because, like, with any kind of computer software programming, like, you just like your phone, it gets software updates all the time. So at any point, you can delete and overwrite different files to help you lean into who you are more and who you want to be. And that's always ever changing. So you're always going to have different software updates to allow you to express the new and more evolved and expanded version of yourself. And I could just geek out all day talking about this.
I love the analogy of a software update because it's like, you know how your phone asks you to like do it overnight and you have to like plug your phone in. I feel like anytime I have a big shift in my life where I'm like really working through something hard or I'm doing something new that's like really stretching me, I get so tired and I feel like I do sleep way more. So it's like, okay, I'm in a software update. Like I need to sleep a 12-hour stretch with no one bothering me and no responsibilities because I'm updating my software. I love that. I love that perspective.
Totally.
It's so accurate.
Totally. And from a spiritual sense, I love it too, because I really do feel like when we go to sleep, like our souls are up in like the astral plane, like sitting at a conference table metaphorically, like being like, okay, so down on earth, here's what's going on. Like, plot twist, where do we want to change some things? But that's just
my God,
me.
I love that. I love that. I've always wondered about that, if that happens. I don't know if I'd be at a conference table. I think I'd be like at like a coffee shop or like a dance party or something in the astral realm. In the astral realm. Well, I think what you were talking about is really true, and it's interesting for me to dive into this as a mom to toddlers because my girls are 3 and 5, and it's like seeing it happen in real time with them as far as like developmental stages go and the way that their awareness has just shifted and changed and who they are, you know, from such an early age. Like you can see their personality and who they are as a being, as like a soul. And then it's like, you know, over time, they just get so conditioned by the world, regardless of whether we want it to happen or not. It's like, I would consider myself a pretty conscious parent. Like I'm obviously into the spiritual space. I'm into personal development stuff. I'm like obsessed with learning about childhood psychology because I'm like, I want to be the best mother I can be, right? But it's like, no matter how intentional you are, your children are exposed to the world, and it's just it's a natural part of us growing up. Is it's like you're born this like blank slate, like you said, this kind of like empty, just like vessel that's just pure consciousness, just pure soul. And then you start to just pick up these things from your caretakers, from your school, from your friends, from other people. And I mean, the media, even in and of itself, like there was a time period where my daughter was speaking in a British accent because she watched Peppa Pig so much. Like she would refer to things in British terms. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like the trolley instead of the cart at the grocery store. Like I was like, what? Like, but it's like, that's just part of life, right? Like you're around things and people and you absorb all of that as a child. And then you start to create these belief systems, right? It's like a belief is just a thought that you've had enough times to hold on to, right? And to have proof for. So you create all of these belief systems, and some of which are completely just given to you by your parents, right? This is what we believe. This is, you know, with spiritual beliefs, with anything. And then some of them are things that you kind of slowly build up over time based on your own experiences, your own data that you're pulling in. Like, okay, if I act this specific way, people tend to seem to accept me, versus if I act this specific way, it seems to really bug my parents and pushes them away, right? So I'm going to develop a belief that the more I act like this, the more I get what I want, or the more that I act like this, the more I get pushed away from people. And so it's really fascinating to see it happening in real time with my kids, and to know these things logically, but to also be like witnessing it in the moment. And there's a part of me that's always like, I don't want to mess this up. But then there's another part of me that's like, you know what, this is what it is. And I think part of the, responsibility you have as a soul in this lifetime is taking responsibility for those beliefs and really evaluating, like, where did these come from and how are they impacting me, and do I still want to keep this belief? Like, does this still work for me at this point in my life? It might have made sense for me then, and thank you for keeping me safe and helping me connect and helping me navigate the world, but like, is it still something I want to keep on? And I think it's just this ongoing, almost like taking a self inventory of, what's going on up here, and do I actually believe these things? Do I actually want these to be true for me? And if not, how do I start to rewrite that?
Yeah, I see it, back to my analogies, because that's how my brain processes, like a switchboard with a bunch of different like switches. And you learn very quickly what to turn off and what to turn on. And then as you become an adult later, it's like, okay, hold on. Like, I want to turn this back on and see how this goes. But we can't have them all on at the same time. So I think this kind of plays into two parts. It's like the parts that you learn to turn off that weren't safe, the parts that, like, maybe you were interested in but nobody else showed interest in, so then you just naturally kind of turned it off that way. But now you're an adult, you realize, like, wait, I do want to turn that part back on, just for sheer like desire to turn it back on. But you can't have them all on at the same time, so it's like at any point you can flip those switches, and because you can't have them all on at the same time, you can turn different ones off to allow the room for you to turn the other ones on to be at play. I kind of like that analogy in terms of just at navigating yourself in general. There's so many different facets of who you are with this switchboard, and it's like, what do you want to turn off and on? But knowing that you have the permission to turn those off and on at any point throughout your life. Like, okay, let's dial up the fun switches over here and have some more fun, versus sometimes in your life calls for more like seriousness and more like logical thinking and being more in your masculine, for example. So it's like you have all these different switches, but knowing that you have the permission at any time to switch those off and switch them on and change the programming in whatever way makes sense to where your intuition is guiding you at any point in your life.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and I think it can be hard sometimes when you're trying to do something new that maybe it's a part of you that you haven't accessed for a long time,
Totally.
or it's something that's like outside your comfort zone and it's something you want. Like, you can feel your intuition is calling you towards this energy. Maybe it's like, being more playful, as an example. Like, I am leaning towards these things. I'm being drawn towards these things that would bring out that playfulness in me, but it can feel really hard to actually like step into that space. And so I like that idea of the switchboard, because it's almost like, okay, the more you kind of slowly turn on the playfulness, the more you can kind of like step off of the seriousness. And there's like a balance there, because it's almost like the opposite end of the same frequency, right? Like, moving more towards this, and then you just kind of naturally are moving away from the opposite end of that. And it's like the range involved in expressing yourself, right? It's not like you're always playful or you're always serious. There's a range there. So this work is about tapping into, what are the opposite ends of that, and like, do I give myself permission in my day-to-day life to actually like fluidly move through these different expressions of myself? And if not, why not? And I think that's like the harder work, right? Because this stuff isn't as easy as evaluating just like, oh, you know what? I haven't been to the gym in 6 months. I should probably go to the gym, right? It's like really deeply rooted in your subconscious of like, well, if you're not playful, there's a reason why, right? Like, if you were super playful as a kid and it's kind of gotten, I don't want to say beat out of you, because that sounds like kind of literal, but it's like, I mean, like,
it wasn't
metaphorically, like if it's gotten kind of metaphorically beaten out of you over the course of time, because, maybe your parents weren't very playful themselves. Maybe they were
Yeah.
super serious. So you would see yourself, those little moments where maybe you went to do something funny and you were messing around and they were like, Gina, get back over here. Like, we have to go do this
Yeah.
thing. I notice I do that with my kids all the time when they're like in the middle of doing something fun. And I'm like, all right, guys, it's time to get your shoes on. And it's like, I have my own agenda of like, we need to get out the door. But to them, they're
Yeah.
just like trying to have fun and be in the moment. They don't know what my whole day plan looks like. And so it's these little like micro moments that over time can add up, and you end up creating these rules for yourself and these beliefs of like, I'm not a person who plays. I'm not a person who has fun. Or maybe I only do it in these very specific containers, like when I'm at school or when I'm with these certain people or when I'm doing this specific thing. And so I think a lot of it is just starting to even bring awareness to what are you being called to? And we've talked so much about like, following your intuition, and it's leading you to something for a reason. So that can be a really good way to kind of get started as far as tapping into like, what are the energies that I'm trying to lean into and stretch into here, and ways that I'm trying to express myself that maybe are outside of my comfort zone. And, what has that looked like historically for me as far as, where did I shut this off? Like, when did this initially start to become blocked in me? And I think those questions can really help you start to at least uncover some of the work that there is there to heal.
Yeah, I think it's overwhelming to think about it from the sense of like, okay, well, who am I? Where do we even start with that? That's like a huge
Yeah.
thing to unravel, and I think the best way to navigate that is really just let your intuition guide you towards what it's guiding you towards, and then whatever
Yeah.
comes up through that is the thing that you work on, and then the next thing that you get guided towards when you feel some friction there with that, and you're rumbling through something, then work on that next piece. It's like you don't have to boil the whole ocean at first, just like
Right.
allow the path to navigate you towards what the next piece is, to peel back that layer and discover a new part
Yeah.
of yourself, because otherwise it can get really overwhelming to be like, okay, let's start from scratch. Who am I? Where does the programming start and stop, and like
Yeah.
what's mine and what's what somebody else put there.
Yeah. And I think if you've spent, decades or a majority of your life at this point not knowing who you are, it can feel, at least for me, in the times when I've felt really disconnected from myself, it feels like almost depressing and kind of hopeless to like be asked that question, because you just genuinely don't have the answer at that moment of like, well, who are you? What do you like? And I remember this was especially true for me when I first became a mom, when I had this huge
Mm-hmm.
identity shift of like stepping into motherhood and becoming a mother, and all of the things that change like so quickly, in some ways overnight, that you're just not prepared for. And I remember hearing all of this stuff about, postpartum self-care and making sure that you're, filling up your own cup first so that you can fill up everybody else's cup, and make sure you take time for yourself to do the things that make you feel good, but you have like a 5-minute window to do these things. And I just remember being in this position of like, I don't know what I want to do. Like, even if someone were like, hey, I'm gonna take all of your worries off of your plate for the whole day, I'm gonna take care of the babies, I'll take care of the house, like you can go do anything you want. I like genuinely didn't know at that point in my life, like, what do I want to do? What would make me feel better? And I think it was just, part of it is being in a position like, transitioning into something new, whether you're going through something really big in your life. And those times you do tend to have kind of a disconnection from that sense of yourself in a way, because everything outside you is like being tested and kind of flipped upside down. But in those moments, it can feel almost like you said, overwhelming of even trying to figure it out. And so I think a really good starting point is just that practice of mindfulness and that practice of presence, of, anchoring into this moment. And it can be as simple as like we talked about with building up your trust muscle again, like, what do I need to do right this second? Like, what would feel good for me right now? Maybe it's just literally sitting on the couch and staring out the window.
You're
And
like, sleep, I need a software
I
update.
know, right? Like, it can be really small, but I think it's the intention behind it, and knowing that like you're choosing to do something in order to get closer to yourself. And it's like having this like, I want to know myself better. I want my relationship to myself to get stronger. And so it's like kind of recognizing, like some of you listening may be at a point where you're like, hey, I've been really disconnecting myself for most of my life or for many years. And part of it is just even just becoming aware of that and having that intention, setting that out there of like, I'm on a journey back to myself. And that means that it's going to be a daily process of like, remembering the little things and just and kind of like picking up these little breadcrumbs over time. And eventually you will get to a place where you do feel much more anchored and much more rooted, and you're able to say, okay, great, now I want to work on this childhood repressed part of myself that, but like it takes time, and it happens in stages. And so I think, like you were saying, a lot of your 20s and now in your 30s, you've kind of had this shift as far as how you're applying these things. I think it's similar in that same regard of like, you go through these ebbs and flows in life where you're more connected and then less connected to yourself. And when you're just starting to kind of get back into it, it's like, okay, how do I ease my way into this? How do I just start to get to know this person again? And doing it from a sense of like curiosity and openness. And, it's not a bad thing. It's not, I think one thing I really realized about myself, and something that I've tried to just be super hyper aware of when I'm speaking about my experiences, is I used to constantly say, when I would tell people the story of some of the things I've gone through, that I went through this period of abandoning myself, which just is like such a harsh way to talk about what happened. It's like I was very disconnected from myself, but it's like I wasn't abandoning myself. It's not like I was like, hey, I hate you and I'm leaving you, bye, like never, don't ask me for anything again. It was like, that's not really what it was, right? But like the language around it, the way I was telling myself that was so harsh. And so it's like coming at it from this sense of, it's okay to feel disconnected from yourself. I think most people do. And it's really strong to actually be admitting that and to be like, hey, I'm on this journey of trying to develop a stronger relationship to myself, and knowing that it's like an ongoing process and there's no end point. We've talked about this with other situations, right? But it's like it's that journey, it's that ongoing process, and knowing that like it's not that once you're there it's going to just stay there. You might forget it and you come back.
It's an ebb and flow, like any relationship. And I think that's a lot of what the journey back home to yourself is about, because I think what happens over time is a lot of it comes from safety. Like you're trying to protect yourself, you're doing what you need and what you think is best for yourself. So no, you're not necessarily abandoning yourself, you're just throwing your like self in terms of like your desires and like what you want to be doing with your time in the back seat. Well, like you drive, kind of being in your masculine, like I'm going to get us to safety, when you're thinking of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
right?
like as you're growing up and you're trying to fend for yourself, climb the career ladder, be able to put food on your table and keep a roof over your head, those kinds of things, like you don't really like have all the time in the world to be like, okay, what do I want right now? What do I need? And like, I'm going to go do that because that's what I feel like doing today. It's like our society up until this point hasn't really run like that. And so you kind of get thrown in the back seat and you're just like there along for the ride. So yeah, that abandoning piece is kind of a little bit harsh when you think about it, and it certainly isn't the case. It's just like, okay, I'm doing what I think I need to do for us to be able to, get us through to the next stage in life. Whereas I think when you get a little bit older, you're at a different hierarchy of needs to be able to step back a little and be like, okay, like not this season is going to be called my turn, and what do I want, and who am I? And as you're navigating that, I think you navigate it like you would navigate a new relationship, a new friendship or romantic relationship with somebody, and how you would get to know them. Like you spend time with them and you listen to what they have to say, and you observe it, and you learn through their behaviors who they are as a person, how they tick, like what buttons get pushed, what things they enjoy, what lights them up. You're just flipping that around internally and doing that with yourself. And it's being in that constant state of observation of like, okay, like what do I want right now in this moment? Like what feels good to me here? What do I feel like doing with my time? And that just becomes a daily practice of being in relationship with yourself and slowing down to make time for that.
I think a lot of us get stuck in the way we speak about, well, I'm just not that type of person,
Yeah.
right? Like, I'm not outgoing or I'm not confident, right? And there's like these mass labels that we like throw on ourselves of what we
Oh,
are
yeah.
or aren't. And so that's an invitation too to start to kind of notice the way that you speak about yourself, right? Like,
Yes.
because it's always changing and it can always change, like we talked about earlier. It's like it's on this continuum, and you can
Yeah.
become more confident, you can become more outgoing, but when you like instantly just label yourself like that, it shuts down all of this opportunity to push that and to
Mhm.
expand that. And I think that's something that, you know, a lot of this work can be really helpful to look at in like a coaching container or like in therapy or more, you know, one-on-one type work where you're having this mirrored back to you, because a lot of it
Mhm.
is so deeply rooted that it's not, you know, like I was saying earlier, it's not as easy to just be like, okay, I know I haven't been going to the gym, I know I need to go to the
Yeah.
gym, right? It's like some of these things you might believe, you don't even have the conscious awareness of like, oh, I actually think that way about myself, right? And
Mhm.
I think once you start to do this work too, it's like you can start to apply it to some of your other relationships and start to see how there's parallels in that as well. Because, you know, as we've talked about in our episode about friendships, it's like sometimes when you start to step into this different version of yourself and you're starting to try on different hats and start to wear different parts of your personality, some people aren't going to stick around for that, right? And it might change
Mhm.
some of the ways that you've been relating to other people, and some of the people that maybe have been kind of like on the peripheral in your life start to actually move in a little bit closer and can help you tap into these different aspects of yourself. Like, I think I have many people in my life who've really helped me move into this version that I am now, because I sort of like, part of me knew I needed to almost have that modeled to me or like mirrored back to me. Like, I want to surround myself with more confident people, and in turn it helps me to access my confidence
Yeah.
and to then express it more, right? So it's interesting with like the labeling piece and noticing the way that you're thinking about yourself and the way that you're labeling yourself when you're speaking to others or when you're identifying with others. And I feel like that can be a really interesting way to kind of like start digging into this stuff in a more tangible way.
Oh, yeah, totally. I think one thing that I've learned the most of being on this journey is how like fickle your identity can be. Because I've
Yeah.
just seen as I've grown, I mean, my way of expressing myself has changed so much over the years, and I've had enough data at this point to look back and be like, oh, that's so funny that like I really thought that I was this way at one point, or that I liked this and I didn't like that, and now like fast forward, I like that stuff that I said that I didn't like, or I am a
Yeah.
different version that is who I thought that I wasn't back then. And so it's been really interesting to see those changes, and it's just allowed me the permission to go, okay, let me just step back and not be so attached to these things that I think are my identity, because they can change at any point. So like for
Mm-hmm.
example, like I grew up with the typical like 90s diet. I ate fast food all the time. We had like chips and snacks in the house, soda, like it was just like all the processed foods all the time. And I remember when Whole Foods opened up in Scottsdale, it was right across the street from this restaurant I was working at the time. And I remember walking in there because everybody was so excited about Whole Foods. And I walked in and I was like, where are all the name brands? Like, where's the soda? Where are the chips? Where's ketchup? Like, where are these things that, like, why would anybody shop here? There's no name brands. Like, I walked out and I was like, that store's dumb. And I don't think I went back for like a handful of years, and I just like didn't get it. And I was like, I hate Whole Foods. And now I will not shop at a regular grocery store. I only want to shop at Whole Foods. I only want to eat organic. I don't like processed food. And it's just like, it's so funny because I was so turned off by it and was like, ugh, I don't like Whole Foods. And now like I like them so much. I have like their credit card for the points. Like, so it's like, it's just so funny. And then I remember too, I think somebody at some point had like an LL Bean catalog, and I was like looking through it. It was either LL Bean or REI, and I was like, look at all these outdoor people like wearing like these funny little like hiking shoes and doing all this stuff. Like I just don't relate to that. Like if I ever met a guy that like dressed like this or did this stuff, I just like no way, no thank you, like zero interest. And like now I'm such an outdoorsy person, and I shop at REI, and it's just I've just learned over the years like how funny it is to be like this is me and this is not me, and I draw the line here because no, I actually really love doing outdoorsy stuff. I just hadn't been exposed to it up until that point.
Mm-hmm.
And if you, I mean, some people are fine staying in the same box and living that way over time. But I love learning new things and being exposed to new things. And now I'm just at a point where it's like, I'm not going to knock anything, because there could be a point later in life where I'm like, oh no, this sounds fun now. Like, it didn't appeal to me before, but it appeals to me now. And to sum this all up, what I really learned about your identity and figuring out who you are, because that could be really confusing if you're like, well, wait, I liked
Yeah.
this, and then now I don't, now I like this. So like, how am I supposed to figure out who I am? And I think who you are at a core level, like at the foundational level, like that doesn't change. And I think that all gets rooted down to your values, and
Mm-hmm.
how you express them changes. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like, once you can figure out what your core values are, like that's what you stay rooted in. Those are the things that don't really change from childhood. But how, you dress your character, your little avatar in this matrix life, and the way that you go and spend your time are just different ways that you express the values of who you are. And I think that
Yeah.
helps to find like a grounding standpoint of being on this journey of like, okay, well, who am I really? And so the program, my 10-week program that I built, like starts off with that, and like, okay, like who are you fundamentally at the root? Because how you express it is going to change all throughout your life. But like, let's figure out what your core values are, so like who you are at like your authentic core. And I
Yeah.
think that's the best way to navigate it. Otherwise it's going to be so confusing. I'm like, wait, I was into this and now I'm not. Now I like this. So how do I discern who I am from that?
Yeah, I did an exercise one time about core values where you had like little sticky notes with individual values on them, and then you would like order it. And it was interesting because it was like showing, I think the idea was that you're supposed to get to like your top 10, and then from there sort it in order of importance, like your top 10 values, and having to look at things like so individually of like, okay, well, honesty is a core value of mine, but so is like freedom. And it's like, well, which one's more important? And it's just it can feel like such a big question. And then I had to think through like individual points in my life, or like important moments where I was, maybe it's like something where you're looking at, okay, well, if I was in this situation, what would I value more? Would I want someone to be honest, or would I want to feel more free? And it was like such a mind bomb for me, because I was like, wait, like I had never in my life sat down and like intentionally done an exercise like that. And I think I did it when I was like 26 or 27. And it's just interesting that we don't talk about these things earlier. Like, it's not right. Like, we talked about this in our Earth School episode. It's like, we're not taught the stuff that actually matters. And so you end up just finding this out somehow. Like, you find a good therapist or a coach or someone like gives you the opportunity to do something like that. And then it kind of does flip the way you see everything from that point on, because you have this like framework to which you can
You run
apply
everything
things.
through it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Is this in line with my values? But I think it's also one of those things where, again, it's like keeping an open perspective always, because I think it's really easy at sometimes to kind of like shut certain things down, or to feel like, okay, I'm going in this one direction and I'm very aligned with my values and I'm doing, X, Y, and Z, and then something pops up, and like having that open ability to kind of let it come in unfiltered. Because I think sometimes what happens is our ego starts to take over, and then that's where those labels can come in, right? Of like, well, no, like I always value authenticity and blah blah blah, and then you start to just develop this like container around everything that you can't break out of. And I think that's where sometimes you start to get like into trouble a little bit.
Yeah.
It gets like too rigid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's where surrender comes into play, and finding that balance between, taking action and following your intuition, but then being in surrender to like what the universe is going to drop in front of you, and just being curious about it. Like, okay, this is here. This feels different. I'm surprised by this thing that just dropped in. What is it here to teach me? Like, if it is not in line with what my values are, okay, like, what does that mean? Let's peel back the layers on this. Let's lean into it. Unless like it feels like an automatic, like full body no, then it's like, okay, like that was just like a test, something to kind of walk around in life and not necessarily pick up and examine. But if you are
Yeah.
intrigued by it and it doesn't align necessarily with what you thought your values are, then it's like, okay, how do we get curious about this and just like see what it
Mm-hmm.
means? You don't have to attach yourself to it. You don't have to assign good and bad to everything of like, this is me, this is not me, this is good, this is bad. Like, we love to label things as humans.
Yeah.
I love to make analogies for everything to make sense of it. Like, I totally get it because I do it all the time too. But I think the more that you can detach and just observe and go, how is this making me feel? Like, just like get the data that's coming in from it,
Yeah.
and then let your intuition kind of guide you from there of like what it means. But nothing is ever good and nothing is ever bad. I don't think. I think we just as humans like love to assign what it is. It just is what it is, and either it's
Yeah.
in alignment or it's not in alignment right now. Like,
Right. Right. Yeah. So easy. It's so much easier said than done, right? So welcome to our podcast where we take the world's biggest questions and we just make them seem so simple, but also not at all. One of the things I wanted to bring up, because this was something I found early on in my 20s that really helped me, is Byron Katie's The Work. And she wrote this book and is in the personal development space and the coaching space. And it's been years since I've really like studied her. So if I misspeak, that's why. But this was like an early thing that I found that really helped me when I was starting to, for the first time, look at my beliefs and really fundamentally like shift some things up from the way that I saw myself and what's possible for me. And so essentially she has 4 questions that you can ask yourself whenever you have a belief or a thought that's causing you some kind of like stressful energy or something that you're reevaluating. Before I always thought that we can use the confidence piece as an example. I'm not a confident person. Like, if you're evaluating that belief and you're like, I'm really not sure about this. So the 4 questions are, is it true? Can I absolutely know that it's true? How do I react when I believe this thought or this belief? And then who would I be without the thought? So you kind of go through each thing and you can like journal it out, but each piece, is it true? And basically the first question is always going to lead you to a no. Like, the more you question it, it's like, okay, well, no, it's not true. And then, can you absolutely know that it's true? I'm not confident. Like, can I absolutely know that that's true? Is there never a single piece of proof in my entire existence where I acted somewhat confident? Probably not. Like, there probably have been times that I've been confident, right? Sometimes where I've been less confident, and that's how there's that range, right? It's like I used to be more confident and now I'm not as confident. There's like a continuum. So the second question, can you absolutely know that it's true or not true? It helps your brain start to like seek out proof of examples when you've been, kind of on the other end of that spectrum. And then the third, how do I react when I believe that thought? So this is where you start to really look at like, how does this impact my life? Like, if I believe that I'm not confident, how do I react to that? Like, physically, I actually, at this point, I can feel like a physical sensation in my body when I think something disempowering versus when I think a more like empowering, soul aligned belief. And, some people might not have that awareness yet, but I do think that that's a piece of it, is like, how does my body physically respond to this? Does it feel heavy? Does it feel like free and light? Does it make me feel kind of like icky, like my shoulders kind of hunch and I'm sort of like, or does it make me feel like, yes, like this is true for me, And similarly, it's like, what behaviors or what actions am I taking or not taking in my life if I'm choosing to believe this thought? So if I believe I'm not a confident person, it's like, well, I never raise my hand for anything. I'm never volunteering information. I'm always the one on mute on my work calls, right? Like, I'm never stepping out. I'm never going out there and meeting new people. I'm never, like, you start to kind of take inventory of the ways that this belief is, limiting you. And then the fourth part is really evaluating that of like, if this weren't my choice in thought, if this weren't the belief I was subscribing to, who could I be? So it's almost the opposite end of that spectrum. Well, I could be someone who goes out and meets new people and tries new things. And I could, do this thing that I've always been wanting to do, but I've always been too afraid. And you start to see the possibility in that. And I feel like it's a really easy exercise to kind of like root down for some of those more entangled beliefs that might be a little bit deeper to like dig out and change just very quickly, because it
Yeah.
gives your brain that proof of like, okay, well, this isn't even true. And there's been times in the past where I've accessed this part of myself. And then here's all the ways that this belief is like holding me back currently. Here are all the ways that this belief, if I switched it, could actually help me, you know, move into the aligned life that I'm creating for myself. And then
Yeah.
from there, it's like you kind of have this like foolproof argument for your ego of like, well, like, look, you know, and then she has more work around like switching the belief and writing out, you know, more positive, more like affirming beliefs from there, and kind of doing thought work around that. But that was like really, really helpful for me when I first started looking into thought work and changing your beliefs in some more like tangible ways to go about that.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like those questions.
Yeah.
I think one thing I like to do to kind of add to that is this keeping me safe or is it keeping me small? That's something I feel
Yeah.
like I ask myself often a lot because I mean I think for me knowing that like we are completely reprogrammable,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of helps me detach from things and just knowing that like okay, like if I'm feeling called towards this thing and I really want to do it, but I feel like the chemistry of who I am right now at this time won't allow that. Like if I feel like I'm more introverted, but I'm being called towards something that's going to require me to be more extroverted, like I don't find myself so fixated on like, well, guess I can't do that because I'm just this way. It's like, okay, well, is this introvertedness keeping me safe or is it keeping me small? Is it keeping me from what I ultimately want to do? And then just
Mm-hmm.
knowing that it's something that's reprogrammable. It's just like, okay, great. Well, like how can I learn to be more of this way because that's the version, the next version of me that I need to step into to be able to follow my intuition towards what I'm being guided towards. So how can, let's unpack the layers of where this is coming from so I can transmute it and reprogram it to actually go towards what it is that I'm being guided towards.
Yeah.
And that's kind of always been helpful for me of like, okay, well, I know anything can be rewritten. Like if I feel like I'm not funny, I can learn to be funny. If I need to be funny, if I need to be more outgoing, I can do that. If I need to learn to be more creative or learn a new skill, like it's just different software that you get to like
Mm-hmm.
download into your brain to make you a different person and
Mm-hmm.
of who, not even a different person, I digress, the person in which you are being called to step into, because really
Yeah.
we're just consciousness, and
Right.
you can become and reprogram anything about yourself to be able to step into where your intuition is guiding you.
Yeah.
Any of those parts that you get attached to are just, they're just what who you presently are. It's the frequency that you're presently vibrating at, and that can change. You can go from being red to blue to purple using a
Yeah.
color analogy, at any point you can switch it up, and
Yeah.
having that freedom at my root I think has helped me quite a bit to just know, okay, like I can change it at any point.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think hearing you say that, it makes me feel like maybe looking at it from the lens of like the intention behind what you're choosing, as far as, okay, if I'm focused on like people pleasing and acting a certain way because in the past it's shown me that I'll receive connection and acceptance and all these things and
Mm-hmm.
it's kept me safe. It's kind of this like lower vibrational state of like fear-based believing and
Yeah.
action taking, that's all coming from this like lower vibrational fear-based, I have to be this way in order to be accepted. And I think that's where a lot of our population
Oh my
operates from,
gosh.
right? Like most of
Yes.
us. And it's not your fault. Like you're raised this way, right? There's like a lot of conditioning societally that teaches, especially women, teaches you like to center others and to put other people first and to always be, scanning
Mm-hmm.
the room to figure out, well, where do I fit in here? How do I stack up here? There's like this constant judgment of like
Yeah.
them versus me, and where do I fit in, and how do I make this work, and how do I work the room, or do I stand back and not even go into the room? Like there's all of this stuff that's going on in your subconscious from this kind of like lower level energy. But I think the difference is when we're thinking about, you know, shifting that of like trying on different things and trying on different
Mm-hmm.
ranges in your personality, but it's coming from this grounded sense of security and peace and like a connection to your consciousness and to your higher self, where you feel like, regardless whether you go into a room and say something and are the funny one and the loud charismatic one, or you're like more of the reserved quiet one, you're still connected to yourself, and you're coming from it at this like, it's like what does the present moment call for right now, and which of my like various ranges of expression can I tap into in this moment, because it's what the energy is calling for, versus this like survival mode energy of like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, I just need people to like me.
Yeah.
Right? It feels almost more like the survival energy versus the like thriving energy, maybe. And like where you're at in that spectrum, and knowing that eventually you can get to that side of it where it is more of this sense of like, okay, I have more freedom to explore these different parts of me without it feeling like this like life or death thing. Like, right? Like, it's not so triggering.
Totally. I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's making me remember that like before I really was deeply on this journey, that really was where I was coming from with things, that it was more so less about what I wanted and what I was feeling in my body, and more of just like making sure that I was well liked, and that I was going to survive in the room that I was in. So it wasn't the energy that came from it in those experiences was just like, how do I make sure people like me? What do I need to do? Like, what does this energy call for that will make me more likable? Versus being like, what do I authentically want in this moment? Like, do I even want to be here? Would I rather be at home? Like, would that feel better to like what my energy is asking for right now? Like, am I tired, or like, do I feel like I need to be here because I don't want to miss out and I want to make sure people like me? Like, that really was the operating system that I operated from for so long, because that was definitely a deep wound of mine, and navigating, the codependency and all that. So I think, it really does depend on where you are at in your journey, and if you can even tap into, okay, well, what do I want? So I had to learn that very often, was like, okay, do I even want this particular person to like, do I even like this particular person? Do I want to be accepted in this room? Or like, like what do I actually want? It was something that I didn't really ask myself for the longest time. And I think that's kind of where the journey starts with this, is when you finally get to the point where you're like, okay, it's no longer about other people and making everybody feel comfortable and making sure I'm well liked. And you flip it and it goes, but what do I actually want? What do I actually need in this moment? And like, that's when the work really begins, is when you're ready to flip the switch and operate from the other side of the coin, to go, okay, it's my turn now. Let's make sure I'm meeting my own needs. And I think that's, at least for me, when all the intuition work started for me. It was like, okay, well, and figuring out what I do want, what is my intuition telling me? Like, that's where all the communication comes from. But before, even though I was having all these intuitive downloads, I was throwing them to the wayside, because that's not where I was operating from in my day to day. Instead, it was, okay, how do I seek approval from everybody else to make sure everybody else is okay? Because like, I'll serve myself last instead of first.
Right. Yeah. And I think we've talked about this too, but it's like your intuition can be really hard to hear when you're in that fear state. Right. And so if you're in a spot like that now, hearing this, like, know that that's okay. Because I think sometimes in the past I had felt defeated of like, I don't even know what I want. It's like, yes, I understand this concept of like, okay, what do I want? I want to fill my own cup first. I don't want to like look at everybody else first. I want to look at myself. But then you start to turn inward. And like we said earlier, it's like sometimes you're just met with nothing, or there's just silence. And it's like, I think at that point it can feel hard. But again, it's like, that's where I think what you were saying just now, it's like really learning to remember that voice of your intuition and know that it's there to guide you in exactly this, and to give you like the smallest, simplest answers that will help you start to redevelop that strength and turn back in. And for me, I had the craziest experience with this, where like I noticed a physical shift in my body. It must have been maybe like a year and a half ago, where I started to actually feel centered in my body for the first time, like probably since childhood. And it felt like, it was like as if I had not had this like core part of me, like it had been just like so disintegrated, and then all of a sudden it came back together, and it felt like a tree trunk inside my body. That,
Ooh,
like,
like
I mean, it
rooted.
honestly, I think it was probably right along like my spine and my nervous system, and like the chakras are all right, like symbolically there. It felt like I was finally like solid in here. It was
Hmm.
the weirdest thing, because it's like before, I think I always just felt my mind, and I could
Up in
feel
your
my
head,
thoughts, and I
yeah.
could feel, yeah, I could feel my head, I could feel my consciousness and my awareness, and I'd meditate and I would feel like my forehead opening, and I would feel more open here, but I never felt like super connected to my body. And that's where a lot of the
Yeah.
embodiment work I do now and guide clients through now is focused on that, because it's like how to connect these parts of you that have kind of gotten like energetically disconnected along your life.
Hmm.
And yeah, it was like the coolest, weirdest feeling, because it was like one day, it's like I had done enough of these little bits of the work to then finally get to a point where I was like, oh, I'm in here now. Like, I'm in here
Yeah.
and I get to choose all of it. Like it was just this like switch, and it was the coolest thing. But it took like years and years and years of a lot of work to get to that point. And it's not to say that I never felt rooted before that, or that I never made, aligned decisions before that, but it was just like one day something shifted. And I think what you were talking about with data and having enough data over time to kind of start to see these bigger shifts, it's like it's somewhat comforting to know that like the more experiences you go through, the more conscious you are of them, the more awake and aware you are to these things. It's like you're just going to keep getting stronger and stronger and building up that inner resilience and that inner
It's such a
connection.
muscle.
So yeah, so then you have that ability to just be like, okay, I'm like here in myself, and regardless of what happens out there and what other people think or what else is happening, like I can find my sense of inner connection, right? And like
Yeah,
I've got it. And it's just such a great place to be, because of course it ebbs and flows, but it's like
totally.
once you're there, it's like everything that I had wanted as far as like a sense of inner peace goes for so long.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I can echo that sentiment too, and feeling different in my body. And I think, I mean, everything is energy, everything is a frequency. And so it's like before doing this work, before building that trust muscle and having enough data points, it's like you're living on a different side of the spectrum where you're more in your head and not necessarily grounded in your body. And like
Yeah.
from time to time, you might swing over to the other side of the spectrum for a minute and feel really grounded on a certain day or for a week, a month, whatever, and then kind of go back to like where your like baseline
Yeah.
resonance is. But as you continue to do this work, your baseline will slowly shift along that like frequency line until you are on the other side of it and you are more grounded in your body instead of being so much in your head. And for me, I know we talk a lot about the seat of self, and it really does feel like I'm sitting in my seat of self. Like I feel rooted in my body, like at like my root chakra. Like it feels
Mm-hmm.
grounded in there instead of being up in my head, and it feels lighter. That's something that I notice all the time now, having really put in the work over the last handful of years. Is it just feels lighter? Like I
Yeah.
breathe lighter. It doesn't feel as heavy, and it's like it's a weird like paradox thing because it's like I feel so grounded and rooted, but yet I feel so like light and like floaty at the same time, which is a
Mm-hmm.
really interesting juxtaposition to be in. But I notice quite often just how much lighter it feels to operate from this place of like high self-worth and feeding my needs first and everybody else's second, not from a selfish place of just like, no, I'm going to make sure that like I'm paying attention to what I need and taking care of myself. And if anyone doesn't like it or has an issue with it, I'm okay. I'm still okay with
Right.
that. My number one priority is me. And like, it just feels so much lighter to operate from that instead of the like opposite where I was in that codependent place for the longest time of going, what does everybody else need? I'm going to make sure they're all taken care of. And then once they are, then I'll take care of me and make sure my needs are met. And
Mm-hmm.
like that was heavy. That was a lot of responsibility and a lot of being out in the 3D instead of my seat of self from my center, like tuning in to what I needed. Like it just, I can't recommend it more.
I like feel relief hearing you talk about it. I'm like, yes, yes, exactly that. Yeah, again, easier said than done, right? It's
Totally. It's a muscle.
like,
It's totally a muscle. But it really is cool to see the reward of your work when you navigate something in life that would once trigger you, or
yeah,
something that you didn't like but now you do like it, or just something where there was friction and then you notice all of a sudden there is no friction to it. And like, I mean, it just depends on like where your resistance and your wounds are. But I know for me there's been plenty of times where I see something and I'm like, or experience something now in like present day, and I'm like, oh, that would have triggered the heck out of me if this was like 10 years ago. I would have like cried for like a whole day and like had this whole like spiral of just like inner crisis. But now I'm like, oh no, it's cool, like no biggie. And like I can see that, I can see the growth and be like, oh, that would have
mm-hmm,
just sent me off the deep end, but like I don't care, and wow,
mm-hmm,
it feels so cool to be here.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
I love that. I can relate to that for sure. And I also think having the constant reminder is helpful for me of like growth doesn't happen overnight, because I
totally.
remember when I first started doing this, it was like I really wanted to see, immediate results. And I think when
Yeah.
you're on a healing journey too, it's like you have specific goals. Like I really want to focus on this. And oftentimes it can be really hard to measure those goals and to really see it in the short term. You kind of have to see it from a more pulled back perspective. And I had a teacher once tell me or remind me that, with growth, it's kind of like a plant. Like you can't sit and watch your plant grow, right? Like you
Yes.
can't just stare at it and water it and be like, why aren't you growing? Like, why aren't you
Mm-hmm.
growing? It's like you have to give it time. You have to like water it and trust the process, but like give it space and leave and come back and leave and come back. And then eventually one day you notice like, wow, this plant has grown
Yeah.
significantly. But if you're just staring at it, like creepily watching every single second that goes by, it's like it's never gonna, you're gonna go insane. So I like that reminder too, because I think for me it's like one of those things where I just want to see instant results, right? And
Totally.
like giving yourself space and time. It's
It's such a
important.
long game. It's a long game
Mm-hmm.
for sure, not a short game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is why I think it's important to find community and to, do the programs or work with a coach, go to therapy, and things like that, because it keeps you accountable to yourself and it keeps you on the journey. Because I think for so many of us it can be discouraging after, a few weeks of doing it. It's like when you diet and then you go step on the scale and you're like, how do I still weigh the same? Like you're like wanting
Yeah.
to see those results so fast. But um, the work that you put in, just like with what you put in your mouth, like it takes a few weeks to show up. Whether you're eating like crap, like you can step on the scale the next day and like you weigh just the same. But like in a few weeks, few months is when you start to see the change. And then the same in reverse when you are being conscious of how you're consuming food and what you're doing with your body. You don't see the results for a handful of weeks, and it's the same with doing this work. But you have to stay on it
Yeah.
and stay
Yeah.
accountable to yourself. And so that the community and that support system is so good to keep you accountable, but then also like show you that it is possible, that when you see the other people around you that are growing from it and
Right.
seeing them change, it's like, oh, okay, like, no, this does work. Like I can see it to
Yeah.
believe that it's true. And I'm like committed to doing this like for the long run. And it
Yeah.
helps for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I think having just that underlying commitment to yourself of, when it is hard to remember, like, why are you doing this and what is the whole point? It's like, okay, well, this is all about coming back home to yourself. This is all about
Mm-hmm.
strengthening that connection to yourself and knowing yourself and quieting all of the outside things that have been, making their way into your subconscious your entire life, and really starting to take ownership of like, what are these pieces of me? Are they even me? Are they even things I want to
Mm-hmm.
keep at this point? And if not, okay, cool, I'm doing the work to release them. But you're in this container, in this process of like slowly but effectively getting to know yourself on a deep, authentic level. And I think it's like you can just keep it simple, but it's like that's the mission, right? Like that's the
Yep.
purpose, is uncovering who you are, remembering who you are, and just like rewriting all of the stories that really keep you kind of disconnected from that otherwise. And it's great. I mean, it's the hardest, most painful, challenging work you'll ever do, and it's also the best. And
The
we
best.
just spoke to it, right? Like the other side of it is these this difference just in your being and the way that
Mhm.
you experience life. And it's incredible, and it's ever changing, and it's a never ending journey, like we've talked about. So yeah, but that's, I mean, I think what we're partially doing here, right, is bringing awareness to these topics and just digging into it a little bit deeper to try to pull on some of these threads a little bit more. And our community is really built for just that. We really think that it's super special and valuable to have people who are like-minded and who are in similar paths as you, and using people in your community as mirrors to see your own growth and your own trigger points and things where you can work on. And then similarly, having people to mirror back to you your growth, right? Like having those people that can kind of show you along the way of how far you're coming. And it can be really
Yeah.
powerful, you know, as a metric to show, okay, this is actually working, right? Like, and we're all kind of doing this together. So if you're not already a part of our community, please join us. You can find our free group over at dearhigherself.me, and then follow us on social, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to the podcast so that you will get alerted when we have new episodes drop. Lots more on this to come, because I feel like we only scratched the surface here with this, and every time we finish up an episode, I'm like, I had so many more things that I wanted to say.
Yeah.
I'm sure you do as well. But
Totally.
it's all good. It's all happening at the timeline of which it's supposed to happen. So, but thank you guys for being here. We're super excited to have you and to see you over at our community, and we'll catch you in the next one.
See you in the next one.